My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
Hey, how are you? My name is Ben, and I am a movie buff. I am one part video game nerd, one part comic book nerd, but all parts movie nerd.
Our mission is to bring nerd culture to the masses
by putting it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, TV, manga, comic books, or is that graphic novels, cartoons, websites, animation, Disney, Star Wars, Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, and Digimon, and Mighty Morphin, Power Rangers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Nintendo, Cinematic Universes, Marvel, DC, Justice League, is Batman, Leagues with Superman, Flash, Wonder Woman, Avengers, Iron Man, Captain Marvel, Loki, Spider-Man, and Hulk, and Logan, X-Men, Thunders, Allen, Galaxy Guardians, Star Trek, Trick, Card, and Janeway, Nerds and Geeks come gather around and join them in the Big Bat Jar.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd culture under the microscope.
And where do we clean that microscope? In the kitchen, of course. Haha, that'll make sense soon, guys, don't worry.
I was going to say, usually you would clean a microscope in a lab, you would hope.
True, but in the event, I don't know, do you have a lab here, Joe, that I'm just not aware of? Because if not, I would assume we'd be cleaning this microscope under the kitchen, but do tell.
Yeah, it's hiding on the balcony out there.
Oh, I guess haven't gone that way yet, so I guess I know what I'm doing after this podcast.
So last week when Cackles was on the show, he pulled Dungeons and Dragons out of the Bat Jar.
Oh, cool.
However, I feel like it would be the biggest slap in the face to Pixel Patch if we were to do a Dungeons and Dragons episode without him.
Yes.
Because from day one, from the first time he was a guest star, he was plugging that D&D.
Yeah, no doubt.
Probably one of the biggest Dungeons & Dragons aficionados that I'm aware of. So the conversation today about Dungeons & Dragons is simply to honor the pulling it out of the Bat Jar. You know, Ben the movie buff, have you played Dungeons & Dragons before?
I have, kind of. I've had a few friends, and in the last 4 or 5 months, we've played a kind of form of Dungeons & Dragons, that kind of role-playing. We've done that, or I guess it's not technically role-playing, but we've done a few variants of Dungeons & Dragons a few times, where we've all come up with our names and our characters and their abilities and whatnot, and gone on a few adventures. So I know a little bit about Dungeons & Dragons, and it's cool and all, but yeah, I am not the most capable person here to talk at length about that. We clearly need the man himself. Pixel Patch, if you're listening, you know what to do.
So we'll have a full episode on D&D when Pixel Patch returns from his sabbatical.
Yep.
Which, for those of you listening, it's not for another 4 months, so if you're really looking forward to D&D, stay tuned. It's a reason to keep listening, I suppose.
Yep.
But just to go on that more, for somebody who works in the film industry, I would assume that being part of something like Dungeons & Dragons would be a helpful exercise for you to be creative, and especially if you're in the dungeon master role, you're basically screenwriting.
Exactly, yeah. When one of my friends, he was kind of explaining to me kind of his role as dungeon master, and the more he kept on talking about it, the more it got me thinking, this is kind of like doing a live exercise where you still in a way kind of have to create the world, create the characters. You got to have some sort of story. So yes, it's very, very applicable. So I wouldn't be surprised if when Dungeons and Dragons, whatever the history may be, whoever was coming up with what a dungeon master is and what their roles and responsibilities are, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of that creativity came from just the idea, the concept of storytelling. So yes.
I think it's also a good chance to practice your improv skills because
yes, definitely.
Since it is a choose your own adventure kind of narrative, you have to be able to react to the different scenarios. And I think the podcast that I've listened to about Dungeons and Dragons, where they're actually playing a game, they're mostly voice actors who are improving.
Yeah,
because they're reacting to the different scenarios, and a lot of it's quite funny.
Oh, no, absolutely. We've had so much fun, my friends and I, when we've played our 2 or 3 games of Dungeons & Dragons. And yeah, I think on a few occasions we caught our Dungeon Master off guard because something would happen that he wasn't expecting. And then we'd roll the dice or this or that. And then he'd say, and then sometimes he'd pause for a few seconds because he would see he was trying to figure out what to do next. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I've had a great time. I've only kind of entered the Dungeons and Dragons realm really earlier this year, and I've played it once or twice. Lots of fun, but I'm still learning.
I'm about the same. I've played it twice. The last time I played, I kind of took the story off the rails right at the start.
Yeah.
Because we were assigned the task of helping prince go from a castle to the university. And pretty much immediately I tried to kidnap the prince.
Yeah.
And I rolled the dice and it didn't go the way I wanted, so I ended up like smacking my head off the floor and was unconscious. So for the first like 20 minutes of the game, the group had me just tied up to like a wagon.
Yeah.
And then when I was awoken, no one trusted me because I had tried to sabotage the mission. So
Right. Yeah.
I didn't make any friends there. But
Oh, jeez.
all I have to say, Dungeons and Dragons is a very big topic, worthy of discussion within the Batjar. And what we've done just now is what you're going to get until Pixel Patch returns to the show. And if you were listening to the episode we did 2 weeks ago when we last had Ben the Movie Buff, we did sort of foretell we were going to be talking about the kitchen.
Yes.
So that is going to be our conversation for today's episode. First of all, Ben the Movie Buff, have you ever heard of Vertigo before?
Yes, as in the Vertigo comics, I have.
Really? Okay, you have.
Yes.
I thought for sure I was going to blindside you there.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I have a very small collection of comic books, mostly consisted of Walking Dead and Archie, but then I have a few comics that have come from movies that I've purchased, because once in a while they have, like, comic collectibles, and I'm pretty sure, I think it's an Alien versus Predator comic that, or no, maybe it's Dark Horse. Anyways, I have one comic that comes from Vertigo Comics, and that's why I know of Vertigo Comics.
Okay, yeah, so the movie we're going to be talking about today is based on a comic book that I should say was published by Vertigo.
Yes.
So a little bit of history for everybody listening. Vertigo Comics, or as it's referred to now, DC Vertigo, is an imprint. It is a subsidiary, if you will, of DC Comics.
Okay.
So you might ask yourself, Ben the Movie Buff, why do these comic book companies have different imprints? Why would they bother putting comic books out under a different publishing name?
Do tell.
Well, in this case, it was to appeal to a different audience.
Okay.
Typically, when Vertigo was first launched in 1993, it was kind of given the mission of producing content that was more adult in tone, theme, language, and could cover themes and subject matter that their normal comic books wouldn't be allowed to cover. At the time, there was this thing in comic books called the comic books... What is it called now?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that would appear on the front of every comic book.
So for a good 50... 60 years in the comic book industry, we had the Comics Code Authority, which is basically a censorship body that ensured the comic books that were being put on the stands and in the comic book stores were safe and appropriate for children.
Yes.
And comic books, kind of like the movies, essentially started introducing like kind of rating systems as well. So salespeople would know, don't sell this particular book to a child because it's more adult in nature. Well, Vertigo was introduced in the comic book landscape so that DC could hire writers and artists to write more mature subject matter and more mature comic book stories for an older audience.
Okay.
So Vertigo was launched in 1993 by Karen Berger. And I'm going to name you some of the titles that are associated with Vertigo, and you can tell me if you've heard of these before.
Okay.
The Sandman.
Maybe?
Preacher.
Yes.
100 Bullets.
No.
Why the Last Man.
No.
Fables.
No.
Constantine.
Yes.
A History of Violence.
Oh, yeah.
Stardust.
Well, if it has anything to do with the Stardust movie, yes. If not, then no.
V for Vendetta.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
iZombie.
iZombie, yes.
Lucifer.
Yes.
Okay, so those are just a bunch of the comic books that have been published by Vertigo.
Okay, cool.
So it existed as like I said, a platform for DC to put out comic books that talked about stuff they weren't allowed to put in their mainstream books.
Right.
By the year 2010, 2011, the Comics Code Authority had basically been phased out.
Yeah.
And everyone was just kind of using their own independent censoring system.
Right.
So the need for Vertigo kind of went away, but then they kind of brought it back a few years ago. And it's a way, I guess, for them to tell these sort of stories while not putting under the same banner, if you will, as the regular DC comics.
Right.
Which generally they still kind of skew older, I would say. Like it's like if you wanted to compare it to like a movie rating system, your average DC comic book is like a PG-13 or like a 14A.
Yeah.
It's a more of a niche market that is being targeted with these comics. I don't know how to talk about this because one way it's saying like, oh, well, of course, comic books are meant for younger people, so the audience for more adult-themed comic books would be smaller. But then on the other hand, it's like, well, just actually and generally, most content available is intended to be enjoyed by a larger audience.
Right, yeah. Well, I think the thing to remember, too, about both movies and comic books is that both mediums have, so like movies every year, there are so many movies that are made, and yes, it seems that sometimes R-rated movies might not make as much as say a PG-13 movie or PG movies, for example. Like I would argue that the PG-13 movies are probably the ones that make the most money because those tend to be your blockbusters that can either be attended by the whole family or that a lot of people will still go and see. Whereas once in a while you do have R-rated movies which are based on comics like Logan and Deadpool 2, which all made a lot of money. So it goes to show that there is an audience for those adults, but when you have something like a Marvel movie or a Star Wars movie or a DC movie where you can bring the whole family, basically, they tend to make a bit more money because, 6-year-olds can go see Avengers, whereas you wouldn't bring a 6-year-old to Logan or Deadpool. So, but there is still an audience for the adult entertainment. By adult, I mean like the R-rated the R-rated stuff.
The other thing that people liked about Vertigo is that it was mostly like creator-owned works.
Okay.
In comic books, what that means is that generally, if you're a writer, if Ben the Movie Buff, if you were hired tomorrow
Yeah.
to work as a writer at DC Comics,
Yeah.
anything that you created would then legally belong to DC Comics.
Yeah, of course.
You would get like a credit on movies or shows that your characters show up in.
Yep.
But they would be owned by the company. Because as an employee of the company, you are indeed creating content for the company.
Of course, yes.
But at Vertigo, whatever you create, you maintain the ownership of.
Cool.
And there's an avenue for you to put your stuff out there.
Yes. Yeah,
now,
yeah.
generally, because it is more niche content, like I said, that's themed in more mature material, the potential to like make a lot of money is smaller anyway.
Yeah.
Unless you're picked up for a movie or a TV show kind of
Right.
thing. Which, if you guys are listening to those names of the different comic book series, there are at this point, a lot of Vertigo properties that have been adapted to film. And, even if you think of something like iZombie or Constantine, like those are more supernatural kind of horror-ish material.
Mm-hmm.
And then even if you look at things like History of Violence or V for Vendetta, those are like very serious and they deal with heavy themes and...
Exactly. Yeah.
I've never actually watched A History of Violence, but I'm guessing it's intense because the title says A History of Violence.
Yeah, I think I saw it about 8 or 9 years ago. I do remember liking it, not loving it exactly, but the cool thing about a movie like that is that you watch it and then it's over, and if someone were to ask you, like, oh, do you think that was based on any sort of medium before, or do you think it was maybe an original idea, I would not guess that it came from a comic book. And I think it goes to show that while comic books, you might think of like the funnies from newspapers, or you might think of like superhero comic books like the big craze that's going on right now, it's cool to know that they also do lots of comic books for other stuff beyond superheroes and comedy, right? That there can be serious dramas that can be realized in these comic books. So yeah, I liked History of Violence, but it's been so many years since I've seen it. But I mean, like, it's got Viggo Mortensen. And,
I was gonna say you probably remember because it's got a Lord of the Rings actor.
That certainly helps you. You're not wrong.
So kind of like yourself, I have had some exposure to Vertigo, but I've never been a huge Vertigo fanboy.
Okay.
I don't think I own any Vertigo comic books.
Right.
And even the ones that have had movies or shows, it hasn't led me to go back and read those comics.
Yep.
So, and it's actually funny because it's funny that we're talking about this because Vertigo is actually like ending soon.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In January 2020, Vertigo is gonna kind of like be discontinued as a brand.
Okay.
And I guess what's happening in DC Comics is that they're choosing to start 3 new imprints.
Okay.
That are basically just going to be all labeled as DC. So there's like DC Kids, DC, and then DC Black. All that to say, we've done all this talking about Vertigo. The reason we're talking about it is because, frankly, like we don't really get the opportunities to talk about these small comic book companies on the show. And it's important because the movie we're talking about was indeed originally a Vertigo comic book.
Yeah.
I had no idea existed until I'm subscribed to the DC Comics YouTube channel.
Okay.
And they put the trailer for The Kitchen like as a video on the DC YouTube channel, and I was like, well, what's this weird crime movie? And what does this have to do with anything?
Mm-hmm.
And then I click on it, and then sure enough, the DC Vertigo logo pops up at the start of the trailer. And I was like, of course, that's why it's being promoted here.
Mm-hmm.
So before the trailer, I'd never even heard of The Kitchen, and I'm assuming it was something similar for you.
Me neither. Yep, Ned had no idea what the kitchen was.
And it's hard to find information. Like, there's not even a Wikipedia page about The Kitchen comic book series. It was a limited series. It only ran for 8 issues.
Oh, okay.
Which was a common thing with Vertigo, actually. Like, they did, like, limited series that were, like, a creator had an idea for, like, essentially like a short story, if you will, and they came in and did it over a number of issues, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, like, The Kitchen, if you guys go and look on Wikipedia, the only thing you'll find about this kitchen is, like, the page for the movie.
Okay.
So I wanted to learn. I wanted to research. I wanted to learn like what the comic was about, or all this stuff to like figure out. Well, and especially to compare it with the movie to see how it was different.
Yep.
But I had a very hard time finding any information out. So I know that it ran for 8 issues between 2014 and 2015.
Oh, so it's recent.
It was written by Ollie Masters.
Okay.
And the art was done by Ming Doyle.
Okay.
So these are the people who we can give credit for creating the original kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And I've kind of gleaned some wisdom from what I've been able to access to suggest like how it's different.
Okay.
Mainly it has to do with some of the cast. But nonetheless, let's talk about the stuff we always talk when we start talking about a movie.
Yes.
And that's critics and box office.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, this movie has been out for a few weeks now.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what it's looking like on Rotten Tomatoes?
Yeah, Rotten Tomatoes, it's definitely, it easily below 50%. Like, it has to be, I'm guessing 25%?
It is currently at 100.
100? Wow, so it's done very well.
22%.
Oh, wow, 3% off.
Which I think is even worse than Dark Phoenix.
Yes, I think so.
Which I can't remember for some reason.
Yeah, but I don't think it's as low as 22. It's probably a little higher, given what we were talking about over the last few months.
Now, having said that, the audience score. What do you think the audience score is?
Oh, geez. I would hope the audience score is, let's see, I'm going to guess maybe 38%.
So it's actually 68%.
Wow. That's actually, geez. We'll get into more reasons soon enough, but that's kind of shocking to me.
Well, it sort of falls in line with the trend of a lot of these films that have come out this summer, like The Lion King or Aladdin or Godzilla, where like the critics give it a rotten score, but then the response from the audience is more positive.
Right.
But nonetheless, yeah, that doesn't look very good for the movie, does it? Like, as
No,
we're
not
talking
really.
about it here.
It does not.
You want to hear what the critics' consensus is?
Please do. Tell me.
With 3 talented leads struggling to prop up a sagging story, The Kitchen is a jumbled crime thriller in urgent need of some heavy-duty renovation.
I can see why they'd say that.
Box office-wise, it opened up the same weekend as a couple other movies, including the Dora the Explorer movie.
Yep, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, I believe, opened that same weekend.
And I'm pretty sure it actually like did the worst of the 3 of those.
Yeah, I think it did.
As of right now, with estimates from this coming weekend,
Yeah.
it's only made $10 million. It doesn't have any international gross yet, so I don't know if it means it just hasn't been released anywhere else yet.
That's right. Sometimes that's delayed, so in a few weeks there might be a change to that.
According to Box Office Mojo, it's currently ranked 151 in terms of comic book adaptations.
Wow.
I'm just really curious to see if there's anything lower than that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's a few, but wow, geez, because $10 million, especially for a comic book movie, yeah, that's pretty low.
All right, to its credit,
Yeah.
according to Box Office Mojo, there have been 174 comic book adaptations released in theaters.
Okay.
So it's certainly not the absolute worst, but it ain't doing too hot either.
That's right. It's still in that spectrum of bad money.
But it's like if you compare like these numbers always factor in like how many theaters it's opening in and whatnot, and how many it's playing in.
Yep.
And of course, the film itself is indeed R-rated.
Yep.
14A by Canadian standards.
Yeah.
So, as we've just talked about, once you make a movie that level of rating, it limits your audience.
Yep.
But as you've also pointed out, if it's the right movie, the rating doesn't matter because it'll pull a lot of people in.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to wonder at the end of the day, like, are there any kids seeing this trailer and saying, "Oh, cool, I want to see the kitchen"? Probably not. I would venture to guess it's mostly the adults that are interested in wanting to see this one.
Yeah, so its opening weekend, it made essentially half of what it's made so far.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
$5.5 million.
Yep.
And it's, this is a smaller movie. Like, this isn't going to be a blockbuster.
Yep.
But I think they were hoping for more than this.
Oh, probably.
like the budget for the film was $38 million.
Yep,
And-
I can see that.
And from what I've been told, generally, whatever the official production budget is for a film, you would and then double it for the marketing and promotion.
Yep.
So if that's true, if that maintains logic, then the actual true cost of this movie is closer to $76 million.
Yep.
Which means with its $10 million raised, it's not turning a profit at all.
No, I don't think it will. I think it's funny because there are a lot of movies that are risks, right? A lot of movies that you make the movie, and I mean, even like a lot of people said that about Alita: Battle Angel earlier this year. And I mean, to be fair, I think because of how much Alita cost, I don't know if it completely made its budget back, but I think it did substantially better than everyone was expecting it to make. So, but then movies like this come along, and I think I don't think there was enough of an audience for a movie like this. Clearly, there were some people that I'm sure like this movie. Some older women in the theater that I went to go see the movie with, not like people that I know, but people that were just watching the movie, sounded like they were having a good time. But yeah, what a tough one.
Well, so I just saw this movie today.
Yeah.
And the theater I was in, there were 4 people.
Yep.
There was myself, obviously.
Yep.
One other man who was there by himself,
Mhm.
and then 2 like white-haired ladies, which is code for women with white hair, which means that they've aged to the point where their hair has gone white. Just in case there's any ambiguity
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
over what I mean by that. So, yeah, I think my theater showing is kind of like a representation of. Now, granted, I went on a Sunday morning, so it's
Yeah.
not exactly prime movie-going time.
Yeah.
But it sounds like, based on these numbers, it sounds
Mhm.
like that's pretty. Like, do you remember how many people were in your showing?
About 5 or 6.
5 or 6.
Definitely no more than 6. I remember there were 2 people in there when I went in, and then I think another 2 people that came after I got in, and I think that was it. And once again, it was kind of like the group that you explained in regards to like another guy, older ladies, that sort of thing. So,
Oh boy.
yeah,
Okay.
yep,
So the part of why I wanted to cover this film on the podcast is because it is indeed a comic book film.
Mhm.
And when you hear the words comic book film, you don't think of films like this.
no,
So I thought this would be a kind of a neat opportunity for us to like talk about something we wouldn't normally prioritize as a topic of conversation.
yes,
So having said all that,
We gotta deal with our situation. All these men working these streets,
Bunch of guys that have forgotten what family means.
so we remind them.
This is the Irish mob. Organized crime.
Together.
We can run Hell's Kitchen.
Step off my business.
Baby, it's my business now.
You girls been very busy.
My God, I lost count again.
So The Kitchen takes place in the late 70s, and we follow these 3 different couples where, from what I can tell, the women stay at home and take care of either the kids or other things, while the men the man of each couple, they're involved in the mafia, right? So, of course, they have all sorts of, underbelly, illegal things that they take part in, and early on in the story, they get arrested, right? They're trying to, I think, rob a convenience store, and then the cops catch them, so they get thrown in jail, and they're going to be in jail for 3 years. Now, of course, the women who are married to these men are now kind of wondering, where's the money coming from, right? Who's going to take care of us? And surprise, surprise, it's not going to be the mafia. So the girls kind of get together and decide, you know what? We're sick and tired of the situation we're in. We need to step up and find a way to provide for our families. So essentially, they take over, if I remember correctly, they take over the place of their husbands by kind of working in the mafia. And they kind of work their way up the ranks to basically try and get into a position of dominance while also just providing for their families. So it's kind of that idea of good intention, but what they're doing, it's the ends don't justify the means. So ultimately, it's the ladies kind of banding together and trying to figure out how to provide for their families.
so this is the second time this summer we're talking about the directorial debut
That's right.
of
yeah.
somebody.
Yeah.
Andrea Berloff. This is her first time directing a film.
Yeah.
I've never heard of her before, but I'm told that she's done a lot of writing before. She was a co-writer on Straight Outta Compton.
Yep, that's right.
Which got her an Oscar nomination. So a lot of the things I think that we said about Simon Kinberg and Dark Phoenix can be ported over here in terms of just the way the film is shot. You can tell that this is someone's first time leading a show.
Yeah.
And I'm sure even you, Ben, the movie buff, could have done a better job of staging some of the scenes than she did.
I would like to think so. I mean, I've made a lot of bad short films, but you still learn something with every film that you make, and I think that's why we see certain filmmakers, a lot of them, like M. Night Shyamalan, Steven Spielberg, you name it, like Quentin Tarantino, they all started by making bad short films, and then one thing led to the next as they made slightly bigger projects, and once they made that, like, $3 to $5 million movie, that was pretty good and showed promise, that's when they started getting the bigger $30-40 million movies. Typically, you didn't give a first-time director a movie of this size.
Now, she does kind of follow the tradition of like Christopher Nolan and Tarantino in the sense that she's also the writer of the movie.
Yes.
So this is really meant to be her vision because she wrote the script. Now, of course, it's based on a comic book.
Yeah.
So the story is there, and this is just sort of her version of it. But still, like with other directors, when they're not involved with the script writing or the storytelling, I shouldn't say the storytelling because the directing is the storytelling.
Yeah,
but
when they're not the writer.
Yeah, when they're not the writer, you can only blame them for so much.
Right, yeah.
But in this case, Andrea is the writer and the director. So
yeah.
Now, I don't have the film experience you have. So a lot of my commentary on her directing is mostly just how I felt the movie flowed.
Right.
And I think first of all, just you kept calling it the Mafia. I'm pretty confident that the Mafia is a term that's exclusively used to describe the Italian mob.
Okay, then my apologies. Yeah, the mobsters, the gangsters of Hell's Kitchen.
It's the Irish mob.
Right.
That we're talking mostly about in the kitchen.
Right.
Now, the title of the movie is obviously a very clever play on words because the movie does take place in Hell's Kitchen, which, as we've talked about with Daredevil before, is an actual place.
Yep.
It's an actual neighborhood in New York City. And I thought they'd made it up for Daredevil.
Yeah.
Honestly, when I first saw the Daredevil movie, I didn't think it was actually a place.
Right.
But it is. It's a real place. So it's a play on the fact that it takes place in Hell's Kitchen. But then also the film is about these housewives, essentially, stepping into the working world of the mob.
Right. That's a fair point.
And so it's like it's sort of about them essentially leaving the kitchen to run the kitchen, if you will.
That's right. Yeah, leave the kitchen that they're associated with to try and work on a bigger, more dangerous kitchen, if you will.
Yeah. So very clever title, but I'm sorry, Andrea. I had a really hard time following what was going on in this movie.
Yep.
I don't think I heard the names of the main characters until at least a half hour into the movie.
I can't even remember any of the names of the main characters. Jeez.
Well, I have a cheat sheet in front of me, so
please, yeah, so we can put some names to these. I know all the cast names, but
that's the thing. Like, you know, they show up on screen and you recognize him for who their actor is.
Yeah.
But no one calls them by their name until I'm pretty sure it's like a half hour into the movie. One says, "Oh, blah blah and blah."
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, those are their names?
That's right. Yeah. Oh, good to know.
So, yeah, the names are Kathy, Ruby, and Claire.
Oh, that's cool.
So, all right, based on Kathy, Ruby, Claire, who can you guess which actors played which character?
Oh, jeez. Okay, I'm pretty sure Claire is Elizabeth Moss's character.
That's correct.
Yeah. And then Kathy, I'm pretty sure, is Melissa McCarthy's character.
Yes, very
which
good.
means Ruby is Tiffany Haddish's character.
Well done.
Yeah. Haha.
See?
Take
But
that, kitchen.
that's pretty. I guess that's a big strike I was putting against the movie when I can't remember the characters' names.
I know, and it's funny. Quick note about that. They say that, it's a mark of bad writing when characters call other characters by their names because they're like, well, we don't do that in real life. We kind of do. And I think to just make sure, I think really what you need to do is find a creative way so that the character names are said just enough so that we remember the character names. Because, when the character names aren't being said, half the time it's like this character, that character, and like you can't remember the name. But especially like when you have like a big introduction, in like Django Unchained, for example, I'm pretty sure Dr. King Schultz like introduces himself like that, and it's a very memorable entrance that name becomes it stays with you. Whereas a lot of these characters, like the names might get tossed here and there ever so briefly, but not enough to remember them. So, yeah, I think we need the names just enough to remember them, but not to the point where it's like, hey, Average Joe. Hey, Average Joe. Oh, yeah, Average Joe. That's great. Oh, Average Joe. Let me say it one more time. I think there's a thing as overkill.
Ben the movie buff, that was an excellent point.
Oh, thank you. I try,
Yeah, and so the pacing in the movie, the events of the film kind of take place over a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
But even with that, it's like they keep throwing different dates out there, and I was like, okay, but how? I forget what the first date was they show and how far have things have gone. And
Yep.
You kind of did a good. The trailer kind of explains the story as you explain it. Is that these wives whose husbands are in jail need ways to make money, and kind of a plot hole is that it shows the mother, the one of the wives who's a mother, going to look for a job, and they're like, oh, well, employers aren't looking for young mothers because they need people who are stable, which, while is not the best employment practice, it was a common thing at the time, so it's historically accurate. Mm-hmm. But with the other two, it's like they don't have children. Like I never felt like the movie gave me a reason why they couldn't just go out and find work.
That's a very good point. Yeah, they kind of just gloss right over that. They don't want you to think about it too much.
Because so I don't know if in the comic they all have kids, and so that issue it was attached to all three of the wives.
Yeah, who knows?
Because essentially the movie is about these women becoming criminals. It doesn't really present their behavior, their decisions as bad, which is typical of like mobster movies.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
like, I'm not saying this is like a critique of the movie because it's done what other mobster movies have done. Mm-hmm. I heard one critic on YouTube basically say, if you take the fact that they're women out of the film, it's just a generic mobster movie.
Yeah, pretty much.
And the reality is that even though they are women, they're just smart people. They just go about, like, there's nothing I would say unique about the fact they're women.
Yep.
They're just smart people who figure out a way to manipulate members of the mob. As a movie, it comes off as fairly generic, except for when it really emphasizes the fact that they're female characters.
Yep, I agree.
Now, I know Melissa McCarthy mostly for comedic stuff, and I know that Tiffany Haddish has done a lot of comedic stuff.
Yep.
I think Elizabeth Moss was in Mad Men.
She was. I've watched all 7 seasons of Mad Men. She is excellent in Mad Men. So I knew very well who she was before going into this movie.
So I was impressed with their performances. As confused as I was about the actual movie experience, I felt that their performances were grounded, and considering they're known for being, like, the two of them are known for being comedians.
Yeah.
I thought they did a good job with their dramatic performances.
Yeah, I'll be honest. If there's one thing that I will not complain about in this movie, it is the performances. They're perfectly fine. I have no problems there. These are clearly actresses and then also actors who have been in enough movies that even when they're working with a debut director, who I don't know exactly how skilled of a director she is when it comes to directing performances, I feel like, a lot of the cast did perfectly fine. No problems there.
Yeah, I wish I had more positive things to say. I didn't hate myself or the experience watching the movie. It just felt average.
Yeah, for me, I think the way I would describe it is watching a movie like The Kitchen makes me grateful for a lot of the good movies that I have seen, at least in the last few years, because the fun thing about, just anyone being a lover of movies, that if you go to see movies typically that are either received well by people, received well by critics, or a bit of both, like a lot of the movies I tend to see, I'm not trying to see bad movies. I'm trying to see good movies for the most part. And a lot of the times I do tend to see good movies. Most of the movies that I see, I at the very least like for a number of reasons. And I think The Kitchen, when you see how sloppy and rushed, yet also how long it feels, even though it's like an hour and 42 minutes, I think it's not long at all. You kind of are grateful for the movies where more things are able to work out and you have people that probably have a better idea of what they're doing, that sort of thing. Because, I think if I were to see more bad movies, I'd probably be more cynical about cinema. Whereas the more good movies you see, you tend to feel like, oh man, like I love movies because I see a lot of good ones, and I look forward to other cool movies that I might discover. So The Kitchen, I did not like at all. But that was the one thing that had going for it, is it kind of reminded me, they're not all like this, Ben. There are better movies out there. You just have to find them.
Wow, at all. Okay.
Yeah.
It is funny you say that. The film is an hour and 43 minutes long, and it did feel longer than that. I feel like I had absorbed more. And maybe it has something to do with the fact that in that runtime, so much happens that like it feels like things are moving by faster.
Yeah, it's such a strange thing because. So here's one big criticism that I have for the movie. Most movies that I see, if they tend to be longer than 2 hours, like my common complaint of a lot of movies nowadays is that they're too long. I always think like if a movie's 2.5 hours long, it's like if it really doesn't need to be 2.5 hours long, you could probably cut 10-15 minutes off that runtime. And I feel like there are a lot of movies that are in this category. The Kitchen is that rare movie where I think if it were a little longer, it could have helped strengthen the movie, because it seemed to me there were so many quick scenes that I just wanted some of these scenes to have time to breathe. And for me, it was almost, a lot of the scenes were like, all right, here's the problem. What were we going to do? Well, we're going to do this thing. Well, okay. Yeah, let's do that thing. Great. Sounds good. Cut to the next scene. We're going to do this thing. And we did that thing. That's great. Cut to the next scene. Sometimes it just felt too rushed for me. There's one scene in the latter half of the movie, which, I know we're not getting into spoilers quite yet, I would assume, so I'm not going to say exactly what it is. But there is one scene that goes on for, I'm pretty sure, about 5 or 6 minutes. And I liked that scene because I felt like it had the time to do what needed to be done. But a lot of the scenes just kind of go by too quickly, and there are a lot of other important things too. Like you even mentioned about like 2 of the women not having kids. Like, why don't they go looking for work? We don't know. They just decide that they all want to, pick up where their husbands left off, I guess, and kind of enter the mob. So there are just a lot of things that kind of had me scratching my head and wondering, how is so. The movie, while also feeling too long, I feel like could have benefited from being a little longer to explain certain things that they didn't get to explain in the current state of the movie, because I just have so many questions and not enough answers, and not in a like, oh, I'm so fascinated to learn more. It's like, I want more answers because you didn't give me the answers that really should have been in the movie in the first place.
Yeah, and this is where I really wish I had read the comic, because and that actually maybe I'm a little curious to read the comic now to see.
Yeah.
Is this actually just a flaw that was in the original story, or is it a flaw in the adaptation?
Yep.
Because there is an element to this movie, because so much happens. I could see it as if it's like an episodic, comic book series.
Yeah.
Where there's this issue where this happens, and this issue where this happens. Because this isn't really spoiling anything, because it's the whole plot of the movie. But they go from just not being really associated with the mob at all, except being the wives of mob enforcers, to taking over the Irish mob and establishing connections with other organizations in the city. And it's like, wow, that all happened really fast.
Yeah.
One person on YouTube joked like there's so many scenes of people walking on sidewalks in this movie.
Yes, exactly.
And you see them collecting a lot of money from stores and whatnot, but you don't actually see them, the 3 women, doing a lot themselves.
Exactly, yeah. And that's why I wish I just wish there were certain things in the movie that I wanted to see more of that we didn't get to see, and I feel like you were just leaving out big things. And like you mentioned, the transition from them being wives who are out of work and they're like, what are we going to do, to them working in the mob, it just feels like a very quick and lazy transition, right? It's like, how did they do it? They just did, right? They just talked to some people and everything kind of worked out and there wasn't any conflict, which is another problem about the movie too, is that there are certain, there's another screenwriting rule that I've heard of time and time again where they say, whatever your character goes through in the story, whether they're fighting in a war, whether they're in a horror movie, whether maybe it's like a family drama, don't be nice to your characters. Be mean to them. You need to keep on pushing them down time and time again, so they have to keep on getting up and becoming stronger so that they complete their arc of whatever they have to do. If you start off a movie with a weak character, ending the movie with a weak character, like, what's the point? And maybe there's that odd film that does have a good reason for doing that, but a lot of the times if you're going to start off with like these ladies being, kind of like, weak and like their husbands do the heavy lifting, we need to see that arc, and we also need there to be conflict, kind of push them time and time again. And there was some conflict, but there should have been more conflict. There were just too many scenes where it just seemed too easy and therefore boring to watch.
Yeah, there's like a twist that comes in near the end of the movie, and it doesn't really affect the rest of the story at all.
Bad twist, very bad twist.
It should have had more of an impact than it did.
Yeah.
So I think you guys can kind of tell most of the complaints we have are with the actual story.
Yep.
And how it was executed. So that's obviously getting into spoilers. So honestly, I'll be a nice guy and put a spoiler warning in the episode, but honestly, like, it's not worth watching.
It really isn't, unless you are a hardcore fan of Tiffany Haddish, Melissa McCarthy, or Elizabeth Moss, who in their own rights are all talented actresses. If you're not a hardcore fan of one of them, it's just really not worth it. There are so many other better movies to see.
Yeah, and maybe if you really like mobster movies and you're like, oh, I enjoyed Thelma and Louise back in the day, then, when this is on streaming, give it a shot. But certainly, I hate saying this, but don't bother going to the theater to see it.
No, don't.
So let's just get into spoilers here.
Yep.
In the spoilerverse, we're safe and secure.
Yay.
So I think the biggest difference from the comic book to the movie is that Tiffany Haddish's character is white in the comics. So it's 3 Caucasian women in the comic, whereas this whole film, I can't tell who's like, I guess her and Melissa McCarthy are meant to be the co-stars.
I guess so.
Because it's not like they kind of have more or less equal screen time,
Right.
Like, it certainly would suggest they're all billed as like equal, but even before she dies,
Elizabeth Moss
has
gets
less
shot.
to do.
And I mean, to be honest, out of all the characters, the one I was interested in the most was Elizabeth Moss's character. And of course, they kill her off. And then I was thinking, oh, maybe the movie's almost done. Nope. Kept going and going and going. And yeah.
Her character was so strange. Like, first of all, like, they're not shy about showing real stuff. So, like, the fact that she has an abusive husband is a very telling part of her character. And the fact that she's trying to be nice to people, like that homeless man.
Yeah, that's right.
But that she still essentially is dealing with the trauma of being an assault victim. That's very serious, very real stuff. But then she just sort of flips over to being like a sociopath who's all into like cutting people up and
that's right,
and murdering people. And I was like, this is a sharp turn.
Exactly, yeah, and I think that's what I was referring to earlier about the whole kind of lazy and quick transition, right? So let's break down a few plot points here. So the girls very easily start collecting money from all the people in Hell's Kitchen, saying like, "Oh, we're going to protect you," and this and that, and then I guess the head mobster, whatever his name may be, the guy with the slicked back hair, the guy who's in charge.
It was like Little Jimmy or something.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, thank you. So Little Jimmy, of course, is, being threatening to them and whatnot. And I guess when Claire is taking out the trash when she's volunteering for the church, I guess Jimmy goes to try and rape her. Which, of course, so for one, it's the way it's shot is just a little shoddy because you're like, wait, who is that? Oh, I think that's Jim. Oh, now
I didn't know it was him. I didn't know it was him.
Like, you need more careful cinematography to show, oh crap, it's Jimmy, the head of the snake, and he's going and he wants to have his way with Claire, who she doesn't deserve that. And so I mean, it's satisfying that he gets shot, but yeah, it happens so quickly. And then a few scenes later, Ruby is sitting in the chair that Jimmy sat in, and she's talking to all the other mobsters, and she's like, all right, everyone, here's how we're going to do business. And my first thought was, I wanted to say, pause the movie. So you're telling me that all these mobsters who are clearly on Jimmy's side, so Jimmy's dead, Jimmy's not coming back, and so either you got to wonder, do they A, know that this happened, or B, they don't know that it happened, and maybe like Jimmy just escaped or retired or this or that. But then these girls come in and now say, we're now in charge of Hell's Kitchen. And they just buy it? It just seems like that's a perfect opportunity to show some conflict, right? They come to the mobsters and they're like, wait, what's going on? Where's Jimmy? Oh, guess what? We shot Jimmy because she tried to do this thing to Claire. And guess what? If you want to mess with us, we're going to blah, blah, blah or whatnot. So you can either hit the high road or trust us, blah, blah, blah. And then maybe some of the mobsters leave, maybe some of them stay. It was just so weird that seemed like such a big part of the story that they just completely glossed over. Same thing like you were saying, how Elizabeth Moss's character, Claire, yeah, I mean, she has a bit of, like she gets abused and this and that. Like, I wanted a freak out scene from her to say, like, enough is enough, I've had it, blah, 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 blah. And then at least that way we could see her pent-up anger as the reason for why she kind of changes the way she does. Because, yeah, the way it was done, very lazy.
Yeah, and this is me fresh. I just took a mental health first aid course, so
yeah.
I know that you get people who suffer abuse and trauma can develop mood disorders.
Yeah,
but that wouldn't lead you to becoming, like I said, like someone interested in the macabre and wanting to
Yeah.
wanting to cut people up and find joy in killing people. I get I understand like the point of it is that she's trying to stop being a victim. You're turning other people into victims, so
Exactly.
and that's kind of like the case with all these women, I suppose. Like they're not trying to be virtuous; they're just trying to be powerful and whatnot.
Yeah, on the one hand, it's like, oh, it's empowering because they get to, join the mob and kind of work their way up the ranks and such, but they're still, and as they say, like there's no honor among thieves, right? Like really, like what is honorable about being part of the mob and, doing illegal things and killing people and whatnot? Not much from what I can tell. From what the movies tell me. I wouldn't know because I've never been a part of the mob.
And to be fair, like maybe the scene that you just complained about is spelled out better in the comic.
Yep.
Maybe they filmed it and there's deleted scenes.
Maybe.
Who knows? But with Tiffany Haddish, we're not going to go into the whole debate about race changing characters from comics for movies.
Yeah.
I mention that because generally it's like when they do change the race of a character, it doesn't really do anything other than just allows an actor of a different color to play a character. But in this case, they really rewrote Ruby's character to match the fact that she is black.
Yes.
And she's very intentional about like where she's from and like wanting to represent black people and again, I'm also like I'm not ignorant. I understand that was a thing in the 70s where especially in New York where like women and black women wanted to like stand up for black women.
Yeah.
But I don't know, did you feel like the way that her story was presented like felt too much like a propaganda piece or
a little bit maybe? I mean, to be honest, when you mentioned that in the comics it was 3 white women, if you were to I guess what I'm getting at though is that seeing like the 2 white women and the one a black woman, I would have guessed that that's how the comics would have done that. Because after all, like it being, in Hell's Kitchen in 1970s, it just seems kind of like a normal thing, right? That you'd have a bit of diversity. That yes, you'd have the two white ladies, but then you'd also have one black woman. So did it feel like propaganda? And I mean, to be honest, was I really looking out for that? Not exactly. I think it's because I've seen so many other movies that are very, I guess, more obvious about it. So to me, and I mean, it doesn't help that the story really wasn't all that great. But I don't know if it felt exactly like propaganda. It all kind of got muddled with everything else. That it was hard to kind of appreciate one part of the story compared to the other because all of it, just kind of came from a lot of the same problems that are there at the beginning of the story.
Yeah, because again, they in addition to like her agenda,
Yeah.
they also play up the fact that like she's an outsider to the family,
Right.
To the mob family because she's black, and then
Right, of
her
course, yeah.
husband married a black woman, and so like there's this extra dynamic to her character that's introduced in the film because they chose to go that way.
Yeah.
And to me, it wasn't necessarily bothersome. It's just I noticed it. It's like, oh hi, I see you there. I
Yeah.
see their storyline. I see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Not-
Notice me.
You're not very subtle, but
Yeah.
I get it. Like, and that unfortunately, I would almost say it's borderline tokenism because it's like it's seeming like her entire motivation is rooted in her race,
Right.
and not her herself as a character.
Right.
So,
And, to be fair, I guess this whole kind of question of, like, did it feel like propaganda, I guess that also plays a part in the twist, which I would love to discuss in fair detail here because, yeah, a good twist, you should have your jaw on the floor and go, oh my God, I had no idea that was going to happen, but that's a brilliant twist. I can't wait to rewatch this movie and see everything leading up to the twist. And there are some movies that have amazing twists. This movie is obviously not one of them. So the twist is this. Get ready for this, guys. So you have the cop that catches the husbands in the first place and puts them in jail, played by Common.
an FBI guy.
Right, sorry, yeah. And Common we've seen in a number of movies before, and from what I can tell, he seems to be a pretty competent actor, which is cool and all. But then it turns out, so this FBI guy played by Common, we see him briefly throughout the movie. Not that much though. Like you kind of forget about him, and then the movie is like, oh right, he's here for one of those quick scenes, and then we go back to the ladies, and then at the end of the movie, Ruby admits, oh yeah, I've been collaborating with this FBI the whole time to make things work the way I wanted them to work, and it's a twist that feels like such an afterthought. You go like, oh, that was the twist. Okay, I guess. And normally some of the best twists in movies, from what I've known, from what I've seen, either happen halfway through the movie, like well, I won't give any examples just to not give away the twist, but some movies give it at the halfway point of the movie or at the very end. But what's the funny thing about The Kitchen is that they reveal this twist, and then there's still 25 minutes to go with the movie, where like the twist is just like it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't have much of a gigantic impact as it should to the story.
I don't think we see him again.
Exactly, we don't after the twist.
You
That's
would
all.
think that an FBI either he's a dirty cop and he just doesn't care about his job, but you would think an FBI operative would, with all this intel and all this activity, would be putting all these people behind bars. But nope, it's as if it seemed like as if that scene didn't even happen.
It was so sloppy. And once again, seeing a bad twist like that reminded me of all the great twists that I've seen in other movies. So yeah, a very lazy twist that you kind of, I almost audibly wanted to say, what? Like, what's going on here? And then hoping maybe they'll kind of give us some more information towards the end of the movie. Nope. The twist is they were working together all along. Cool. Never seen that before. Moving on. And like that was it.
So with Kathy, Melissa McCarthy's character, like I said, she's the only one in the film who's a mother.
Yeah.
And so I thought the whole relationship with her and her father was actually quite interesting, where he's kind of like the one voice of reason in this whole movie.
That's right.
Basically like, speaking to the fact that you guys are doing bad things, and she calls him out at one point, saying like, you've profited from this as well, so like don't be all high and mighty.
Right. Yeah.
Which I was like, okay, fair enough. But there were just many points with her story I was kind of confused about too, because she has scenes where she's like a nice mom and like she's talking to the people and she's nice, and then she's talking to the mob and she's like swearing and saying and being really like, it's just like, do you have like DID? Because it didn't feel like they were the same person, It's like as if she had literally had separate personalities in those different scenes.
Yep.
Like I had a hard time bridging the gap between those different personas she had.
Exactly. Yeah. It just and I think that comes down to the writing and the storytelling, that you need to find good and clear ways to show why characters act certain ways, and if they act a certain way to one person but differently towards another, you just have to make that clear enough for the audience to be able to follow. And I think that's the messy part about this movie, is that there are just so many things that kind of leave you scratching your head and wondering, wait, how does this work? Why did this happen? I'm having a hard time kind of putting it all together, and I think that's the mark of a good story. Even like certain stories that are kind of complicated, that can still kind of make sense of what's going on and help the audience understand everything they need to throughout each scene of the movie.
Right. I mean, it seems like of the three women, she was able to maintain her humanity the longest.
Right.
In terms of actually having faith in people and trusting people, and then all the people she trusted ended up betraying her.
Yeah.
And with her husband, I felt like there was so much content missing. Yep. As like they're showing us these random snippets that don't really tell us anything, and then we are shown like the end result. I'm like, I actually, if you were to ask me how does her husband feel about all this, I'm like, actually, like I know a little bit because of what he said and what he did, but I actually don't really know where he sits on all this.
Yeah, and to be honest, out of the three relationships, I think the one thing they do surprisingly make clear at the beginning of the movie when they're showing the wives with their husbands is that Claire is married to a guy that physically abuses her, and who knows, maybe emotionally and mentally abuses her. Then Ruby is married to a guy that I don't know exactly like if he's abusive, but I mean, we see later on how he cheats on Ruby, and he's clearly, he's a guy with some very visible flaws. Then you have Kathy married to this guy, and things seem to be okay for them. Seemed like he seems to be the best husband of the lot. And then there's that weird thing towards the end where like and once again, like the scene had good intentions where he's kind of explaining, I didn't know what my place was anymore because the girls had kind of taken over. So he takes the kids to the piano shop where the other kind of mobster is. And then at the end of it, Kathy's like, I have no use for him. Kill him. It's like, really? Like, and I mean, maybe that's part of the tragedy in the scene, but it still kind of leaves you scratching your head. And I know that maybe it's supposed to be a sense of poetic justice that all the wives, their husbands one by one through different means all end up getting killed. But I felt like if there was one that deserved to live, it was Kathy's husband. But no, gotta kill him off too.
Well, she felt betrayed by him.
Yeah, which I get that. I'm just saying, I just feel like they probably could have done a slightly better job of maybe he did something that was even worse, and that made her feel like I have no, because earlier on when they say the thing about like, oh, we'll give you all this money to kill our husbands, and Kathy's the one to speak up and say, no, I don't want you to kill my husband, and then pretty soon afterwards she's like, off him, and then that's that. So yeah, just a lot of kind of sloppy scenes one after the next. Also,
Jimmy or whatever his name is, he's a terrible mob leader. The fact that he gets off so easily, like it seemed to me like their whole takeover of the Irish mob was easy.
It was very easy, and like I said, the easier that the character has in doing what they're trying to do, it just becomes a little less boring, right? I mean, stories are interesting because of conflict, because we have to follow these characters, and we wonder, how are they going to deal with these certain situations? Sometimes you can kind of see them coming from a mile away, but even when you get to that conflict, you wonder, are they going to succeed? Are they going to fail? Is it going to be something in the middle? What's going to happen here? And because, I feel like the first half of the movie, it's pretty easy for them to do, for the ladies to go out and get money and this and that. And once again, I saw a lot of potential for like the ladies going up to various people at the shops and whatnot, and saying like, oh hey, we'll protect you, just give us money, yada yada yada, and the people at the shops saying no, and then one of the girls having to like be all serious and maybe kind of having like a really intense scene where they're like, let me tell you what happens when you don't side with us. Here are all the horrible things, like, oh, you have a daughter, maybe you won't have a daughter in a week, blah blah blah, maybe like something intense like that for us to see how serious they are about it. But what do we get instead? We'll protect you. Okay, here's some money. Yeah, and play a 70s song to show that we're in the 70s, right? It's just a lot of stuff like that didn't work for me.
Yeah, there's that scene in the church with Melissa McCarthy and her dad that I'm sure if she gets nominated for an Oscar, they'll play that as the Oscar clip.
Yeah.
But while I thought she was well acted in the scene, I didn't necessarily agree with what her character was saying, because she's basically commenting on how she feels like a victim and feels like she's underappreciated and feels like the men in her life have not given their due towards her. But and again, maybe it's just the way the film was presented. Maybe that's how it is in the comics, and then like the way that they get to that scene is just a stronger version of what we got than the film.
It could be, and that's like I'm even more curious now to read the comics to see if it's better, if it's an improvement over what we got here, because I could see the potential, right? In fact, a lot of critics were saying, if you want to see a good movie like this, watch Widows, because apparently Widows from Steve McQueen last year, that had like Viola Davis and Michelle Rodriguez and a whole bunch of other, like a big star-studded cast, is kind of a similar idea where I guess like all, like these husbands, these guys go on go to do a heist or like rob a bank or something like that. They all get kidnapped, and then apparently like the women, and I don't think it has as much to do with the mafia, but it's something like they have to repay certain criminals the amount that the husbands could not get from what they were trying to steal. So I've heard that's substantially better than this, but this just didn't quite cut it for me. Although I will give the movie, when it comes to story beats, the one story beat I did like, which I thought was a good idea, was when they go to visit, and of course it's been a few days and the name's already escaping me.
The Italian guy?
Yeah, well the guy they go to visit halfway through.
Piano guy.
Yeah, that's right. The piano guy. It has some Italian sounding name, but they go and they chat with him, and then he mentions how he's like, well, your husbands are getting out in 4 months, and the girls are like, no, they're getting out in 24 months, and then he says, no, they going to be released because of good behavior or whatever. So the fact that the husbands are coming sooner and are therefore going to be more of a threat a bit sooner in their lives, I thought that was a great idea. It's just unfortunate that the actual execution is still not. Bless you. It's just unfortunate that the actual execution just isn't that great.
So coming around to final thoughts, the kitchen, when I saw the trailer, looked very interesting, and I was intrigued to see it, like a mobster movie where it's women kind of stepping out of the kitchen to run the kitchen. It seemed like a really great idea, and while from my own perspective the performances are decent, the story is just muddled and confusing and ultimately just leaves you asking more questions than you get answers. Ben, the movie buff, what are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are, if there are any good things about this movie, it is the performances, the look of the 70s. From what I could tell, looks like other movies of the 70s, or in the 70s are depicted, so I thought that was good. But when it comes to story and characters and how interesting was it? Was there a lot of conflict? No, there wasn't. There should have been more conflict. I think I needed the story to be a little bit longer to explain certain things that they just glossed over. And at the end of the day, it just left me being very underwhelmed and reminded me, that there are much better movies than this. Sometimes you just have to look for them. So, yep, I was not a fan of The Kitchen. Also, too, when it came to the cinematography, it just looked like someone's first film. There weren't really any cooler, impressive shots. It was your typical, medium long shot, get your coverage, get your inserts here and there. That was about it, and it didn't look, with the exception of like the production design, the actual cinematography, pretty bland.
So I think I meant to give The Kitchen 2.4.
Okay.
Out of 4 bat cookies.
1.75 out of 4 for me.
Okay.
Yeah, not a fan.
There you go. So The Kitchen's out in theaters. I'd say catch it when it's on streaming, if you like mobster movies.
Yep.
So this is normally when we would go into the bat jar and look at our mail, but we don't have any.
We need to talk to people about, hey, you, whoever's listening to this podcast right now, can you please send them some mail? Because I always feel so bad for Average Joe when he says, this is normally the part where we look inside, but there's no mail. Send us some mail. Is there anything you'd like to know about Average Joe or myself? Please ask us a question. Honestly, I don't know about Joe, but ask me anything. I'll answer just about anything within reason.
So if we had an episode that was just an AMA for Ben the Movie Buff.
Hey, that'd be cool. Yeah, no, I love answering questions about myself. I know it sounds so egotistical. I'm an open book, as people know about me.
All right, so remind the people how they can get a hold of us.
I will. Listen up, guys. If you want to contact the show with a question or an idea for an episode, you can send us an email to
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
We are available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Music, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcast. Share our posts on Facebook and make sure to like our page because we want everyone to join us inside the Bat Jar.
That's right. So this is normally when we would go into the Bat Jar and decide our topic for next week, but next week when we normally would be recording, I'm going to be attending Fan Expo Canada.
Oh, yeah.
In Toronto. So Dr. What and I put our heads together, and we thought it'd be a fun kind of last-minute recording thing to do an episode. We just did one with Cackles on ranking all the movie Spider-Man.
Oh, cool, yeah.
So we thought, why not do one ranking all of the Batmen
Nice.
that have been in movies. So
That's awesome.
next week's episode will be Dr. What and I discussing the movie Batman, and we'll see Ben the Movie Buff in a few weeks. So until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Ben the Movie Buff.
Catch you on the flip side.
See you in the next one.